Ladies and gents, welcome to the video. I'm GetGoodGuy and this is Battlefield 5 and we're talking about the 6.2 update. And are you ready for probably one of the biggest audio editing jobs I've ever had to do? Because I have 3.5 pages worth of just bullet points to go through covering this update with information you're probably not getting anywhere else. I'm going to go through what's good about the update, what's bad about the update because there are some bad things, explain why it isn't simply the TTK revert that some are labeling it as, and give you my tips as to what you should be looking to use to optimize your play. Because there appears to be pretty much just blanket praise in other videos because DICE put the TTK back to something like what we wanted again, but not enough analysis has been done to highlight the problems, because there are always problems with balancing. It's impossible to have perfect balance, and some of the balancing issues present in the 6.2 update are sizable. And so please be ready for this to be very long and detailed. If you have a shorter attention span, this might not be for you, and I'm not just going to read off how many bullets it takes to kill with each gun, because I don't think that's particularly useful, and don't be expecting charts throughout the video because there's way too much. They'll be up there constantly. Instead, enjoy the gameplay and focus on my overall statements, which I'll make very clear if there are too many numbers flying around. And let me be clear here, this update is far better than what we had before, but that doesn't mean we should have the problems it's going to bring with it, and it doesn't mean we should have had what is now 4 or 5 TTK and weapon balance shifts. Now, thank you for your patience, let's get started. Throughout all of this, please consider rate of fire. As I talk about bullets to kill and time to kill, sometimes it helps the weapon, sometimes it hurts it. Consider if that weapon is easy to handle or not, even if it's fast firing. Bullets to kill aren't the only factor. So, low rate of fire automatics are kind of being screwed in this update. Some totally, and others having their effectiveness within their optimal range chipped away without good reason. For example, why do the Suomi and the Thompson require the same amount of bullets to kill at 20 to 30 meters as the MAB-38 and the MP-34? Sure, you do have to land your damage, but damn, that's an issue if someone is accurate. And why would they use the slower firing options in that scenario, when SMGs are now pretty much cut off being effective beyond 30 meters or so anyway, with other changes in mind? But we could try not to be cynical, of course. Maybe dropping the bullet damage of the faster firing SMGs would be an issue if they really are hard to manage at somewhat longer ranges for most players. Fine, I'll accept that. That may even be correct when we get our hands on this build. But there's an alternative argument that I can't find a way to argue with. So examples like, again, the Suomi and the Thompson are still effective within their intended optimal range of up to 20 meters or so, right? Because they require the same bullets to kill out to 20 meters, and then only requiring one more at 20 to 30 meters, pretty much outside their optimal range. Well, now consider the slower firing, more mid-range focused SMGs, or apply this to the mid-range automatic option for any class, actually, in comparison to the faster firing ones for that class. So these options are supposed to excel between 20 to 30 meters, rather than 0 to 20. But they've now got increased recoil again, right? But they also require an extra bullet at 20 to 30 meters. So they're now going to be less reliable due to more recoil, and require an extra bullet at mid-range than in 5.0. For no seemingly logical reason when you compare with what the faster firing options are still going to do. So that kind of weapon was a consistent 5-bullet kill at that range, allowing it to shine for certain situations. It's now a less consistent 6-bullet kill, reducing their potency where they're supposed to excel and leaving them lagging behind other options which have still retained their key advantage. And the only way to mitigate these things is with more recoil for the faster firing ones. We are going to see some of that, but still, it's not going to change that they're still very good in their optimal range, and sometimes adding a load of recoil just makes the guns not very fun, so there's pitfalls there as well. We've been forced into this situation due to the damage drop-off ranges. They don't need to be where they're currently set, they could be tweaked for better overall balance. Now you may say, well, that's just your opinion, or I don't really believe in that, so let me back that up. Here are a couple of screenshots from about 8 months ago where a DICE weapon designer literally stated that the range we're discussing is where those guns are supposed to gain an advantage in order to be able to compete and maintain balance. Well, that's now not the case, and it's another sign that there have been people that know this important info when it comes to creating a good game, but decisions get made by management that ignore solid logic, and now here I am talking about the issues with that. Now, this isn't to say that these guns are going to be ruined, it's not to say that other things are going to be way overpowered, but there's a clear problem here with the balancing, and I'm sure that's going to come to fruition once people get their hands on this patch for a while. A meta will form, some things will rise way to the top again, way above other things, and although there's always a meta, the gap again I think will be too big. Whatever reasons these changes were made for, whatever it's supposed to be balancing from a wider perspective, perhaps for example ensuring that SMGs don't get a leg up over ARs within that range, and then maybe ARs over LMGs, etc., it basically creates a potentially unbalanced scenario within that specific class. And that's all while competing with excellent semi-autos and self-loading rifles in the mid-range, which we'll get to later. There will be clear disparities. This then totally invalidates a really large percentage of weapon options. This is my main gripe with this update, despite a lot of it being really good. Even if this is way better, it still has issues we just shouldn't be seeing, and causes another problem with the variety and offer for optimal play being narrow, something that by this point has become a real issue for the game in multiple different ways in multiple patches. Like the M3 Grease Gun fires way slower than those fast firing options, and that still requires 5 bullets at the same range that faster firing weapons require 6, outside of their optimal range. Or the M1917 for assault, which looks like being somewhat of a standout by the way if you want to use an automatic weapon. It requires the same bullets to kill at all ranges as the STG, the Sturmgewehr, and the revert, despite firing way faster and being fairly easy to control for at least some players considering that high rate of fire, especially on PC, and having standout accuracy. And it's not getting extra recoil nerfs, it's just going back to where it was with the 5.0 values. It'll beat a hell of a lot of things out to 30 meters if you land your damage, and that solid accuracy that I mentioned stretches it out beyond that for, again, able players. If you threw this one away in recent times, try it again and see if it works for you. It looks like it's balanced to be a top tier option for automatic weapons. And so, as I imagine you can tell by now, rate of fire is still king for the most common engagement distances. When it comes to automatic weapons, you should go for very low rate of fire purely for passive long range stuff. They're not really going to be versatile, and again they're going to have disadvantages within their optimal range because of the strength of some other options such as semi-autos, etc. So for optimal play, go high rate of fire or simply choose a different kind of weapon for mid to long range. And you can kind of throw half of the automatic weapons away unless you just want to use them for fun. That's not really what any of us wanted to hear, but statistically it is the truth. They're not exactly all garbage, you know, some of them are just a little bit underpowered, but the point remains. I also want you to note that the damage drop-off at 20 to say 30 and 40 meters isn't absolutely massively different for a lot of autos when compared with the 5.2.2 stats, but with more recoil, and at longer ranges it's definitely not as potent as back in 5.0. Think about the effect that might have. Slower times to kill out at medium to longish range. Now yes, that's needed kind of to reduce the laser beam weapon effect, which I do want to get rid of, but it makes it clear that this is not a revert at all. It only has some of the properties of the previous TTK, less than some people probably realize. Onwards, and two other standout examples that buck the trend I've just talked about are the Breda and the Madsen. The Madsen requires 5 bullets to kill between 30 and 50 meters, where everything else in the class requires 6. And then it requires 6 bullets beyond that when everything else requires 7. Meaning that if you're accurate, something like the Madsen can do a lot of damage. You just have to stick to where it's optimal. The Breda is similar, requiring at least 1 bullet less than everything else in class between 10 and 100 plus meters. However, this only applies for automatic weapons though, although the Breda technically is a burst weapon, but I'm sure you see my point. Now some of you will be desperate to hear about the Type 2A. It's getting more recoil and requires more bullets to kill than the other fast firing SMGs. Will that nerf it into the ground? I actually can't say yet, but it's for sure going to be weaker, and I think that's all that some of you wanted to know. Now, semi-autos, as I've been alluding to, are going to be extremely good. I can't emphasize this enough. Remember how good they were back in 5.0? They were the gold standard. A huge amount of people ran around with them. Well, they're going to be excellent again, and with a lot of other weapons not being as good as they were in the 5.0 update. Please, if you take anything away from this video, it's that semi-autos and self-loading rifles are going to be really good. So where semi-autos are concerned for the assault class, you're looking at 3 or 4 bullets to kill out to 50 meters, obviously being superior to most alternatives beyond there as well, whilst also receiving rate of fire buffs to go back to their 5.0 values, and while a lot of other weapons will have increased recoil. For example, the 360 RPM semi-autos such as the MAS-44 need 3 bullets to kill out to 30 meters. Or special shout out to my long-term favorite, the AGM-42, which will again fire at 450 RPM, kills in 4 bullets anywhere up to 100 meters, and has a 2-shot headshot. That will be super good again for the right player, and I can't wait to go and destroy people with it again. Now self-loading rifles will also be good in the right hands. Actually, they'll be insane in the right hands. No longer having to worry as much about getting beamed by things like the STG and certain SMGs, and with all of them killing in 2 bullets out to at least 50 meters. If you're accurate, these are going to absolutely decimate people. But semi-autos will likely be the king for most people due to their more forgiving nature, larger magazines, all that kind of stuff. So you may be asking, why now use the assault class automatics then? And that's a good point, because I don't think anyone else has said this so far. Basically, they have pretty much SMG damage numbers from the 5.0 update, except for past 75 meters, where they're superior, but that's way outside their optimal range anyway. If you want evidence of what I just said, the assault autos have identical damage per bullet now as the MP34 from the medic class in the 5.0 update, at least for a lot of the optimal range stats. Except for the M2 carbine, which is actually worse when it comes to bullets to kill, as it needs 8 bullets to kill past 50 meters. That's actually not too dissimilar to some SMGs in this update actually, but at least it fires fast, so you better make sure you land those shots with it, or you're going to be better off with something else. But if you can land your damage, then it still maintains a purpose. So assault automatics are still there for general play, but just kind of a little bit lacking. Or you could argue that it showed that SMGs were too strong back in a previous update. It really depends on your perspective. Now the same goes for MMGs. They're absolutely better in this update than the previous one though, but that old SMG-esque damage is apparent here as well, needing 5 bullets at 20 meters, 6 at 30, and 7 at 50. Big shout out to the MG42 though for having that super fast rate of fire, whilst maintaining the same bullets to kill as the other MGs in the class. Aside from the Madsen, which is an LMG, there'll be some recoil to control, but that thing will melt when compared with a lot of competitors. And then these damage numbers also apply to LMGs. I remember saying way back in the early days that LMGs just didn't offer enough to compete with semi-auto rifles in that climate at a lot of ranges. Well, I think we're heading back that way. ARs and support MGs having pretty much SMG damage numbers from another point in the game versus very potent semi-auto rifles on large open maps. I think that's going to be a tough one for anyone that wants to move around a bit. Onwards, and for SMGs specifically, they'll still hold their own at closer ranges, as I've alluded to earlier, but we'll be back to being kind of awful, some of them, at longer ranges, with all of them except for one requiring 7 or 8 bullets to kill beyond 30 meters. Next up, bolt actions will be really good for players that are really good with them still. Their bullet velocity has been increased, so they'll be easier to use, but you will be again competing against very good semi-auto rifles and self-loading rifles. It really depends on the player whether that's better or worse, and the same will apply for your average player as well. Either way, they're still not going to be a top meta pick for the vast majority of players. Bolt action carbines may see a little more play again because of the return of semi-autos to compete against, so combating them with heals as a medic is an option. Shotguns are untouched, and that means they're about to get smashed about again a lot of the time, unfortunately. Anti-material rifles will work as expected. Honestly, they've turned out to be nowhere near the problem that I and a lot of others thought they would be. They're just a bit gimmicky, they can be annoying, but other things are better. Pistol carbines look pretty sweet at close mid-range to average mid-range from what I can tell, at least for the right player, requiring 3 bullets to kill up to 10 meters and 4 bullets up to 30 meters, whilst firing as fast as some semi-autos, paired with using flares to help you hunt people down. Just don't try to use them outside of their intended range. And all of this does make sidearms a bit worse by comparison again. Now again, as I've alluded to, recoil has been added for a lot of weapons. Things basically return to 5.0 values. Aside from some extra changes, the ones listed as having additional nerfs are the Suomi, the Thompson, the ZK383, the MP28, the Type 2A, although that wasn't around during the 5.0 update anyway. The Type 100 has had its hipfire accuracy nerfed. The M3 grease gun, again the same. The M2 carbine, the same. The Lewis gun has decreased initial vertical recoil, but increased minimum vertical recoil and increased horizontal recoil. And the Type 11 actually gets a buff with increased recoil velocity. Although again, I don't believe that was around in 5.0 anyway. And so all of this does return a lot of the skill and lethality to the game, just with avoidable disadvantages as well, unfortunately, which I don't think we should be seeing after this many changes. The takeaway is that the damage ranges aren't in an optimal spot because it either leaves things unbalanced, or you have to put crazy range recoil on faster firing weapons to balance them, to the point of them not being fun to use. When we get our hands on them, we'll see how things actually lie, whether it's somewhere between those two statements, but there are just some obvious errors being made with the balancing, and ones that we can see at least one person within DICE was aware of, and so it just shouldn't have happened. But overall, let me stress, I'm happy with the changes because it takes us away from the pretty terrible spot the game was in and moves us to a much healthier place overall. A lot of this is very good. I'm just disappointed with some aspects and frustrated it's taken this long and with this much turmoil to even even get to this point. Oh, and I should add, we will still have snap lock-on aim assist on controllers, unfortunately. We may just have to accept that. And so that is my roundup of why the TTK changes aren't a revert, why it has some genuinely serious problems, but overall looks like being a very good move. I hope you enjoyed, and please let me know what you think in the comments below. If you did enjoy it, leaving a like is massive for me. I really do appreciate it. It helps me to grow. If you're new here, consider subscribing and maybe turning on notifications to stay up to date with the massive amount of content I'm putting out. And all the links to my social media, including Patreon, can be found in the description and my pinned comment. Here is the board of awesome for the epic people who support the channel on Patreon. They're all absolute heroes, and I love them all deeply and of course, often. If you want to join them on the board of awesome, the link to the Patreon page is in the description and my pinned comment. And with that all said, I am GetGoodGuy, and I'll see you next time. Laters. Once again, not quite, and they do, to their credit, say we will be maintaining a drop in range damage, but one that is smaller than has been used in both 5.2 and 5.2.2. That's not necessarily bad, by the way. Balancing is a tricky thing, we do need to tweak things sometimes,